Well, welcome, first of all. And a little bit of just housekeeping to start. I think what we're going to do is we're taping these. Taping. What century am I in? We are digitally recording these. Digitally recording. Well, I think what we're going to do is we're going to create a closed Facebook group. That would be probably the best way to handle it, because we don't just want to put the classes out there just completely generally. There's been a couple people from out of state, or at least out of town, that were expressed interest, so they can come in. And then all of you, are there any of you that aren't on our mailing list, our regular email list? Hopefully not. Okay. So I'll send out, I don't know how these things work. I know you did one for recovery, or you did it, or somebody. But we'll figure this out, and then we all can join. And then the class tapes or recordings can be available to you. And then also we can converse and talk and have community. How about that? So still experimenting with all this, trying to figure out what's the best way to handle some of this stuff. So we'll try that. But this is class 2 of the Retreating in Place, Building Intentional Spirituality. And last week, looking at the outline, we basically got through the first 3 points. And I wanted to pick up on point 3 and kind of expand on it a little bit. We read one quote from Merton. It was the top quote on your second sheet. And I wanted to read another, more extended passage from one of Merton's books called The Inner Experience. Because this idea of intentional spirituality is a little bit slippery. It's a little slippery. We talked about the last week, the Chinese concept of Wei Wu Wei, which literally means do not do. It's the idea of effortless effort. And this, especially to us Westerners, is so difficult to grasp, because we're saying, on one hand, this is not a passive program. It doesn't look like Frank all, back and comfy in the chair. It's forward-leaning. It's something that we have to expend effort toward. But at the same time, if we approach it the way we approach everything else we go after in life, we're going to be at odds with ourselves in terms of what contemplation is really about, what the contemplative life is about, and what we're trying to achieve spiritually. And so it's worth spending, I think, a little bit more time on this to try to see if we can get across what we're talking about. Last week, we spent a little time on this, but just to remember the first quote on the Quotes Along the Way page, Merton writes, and this is from the same book, The Inner Experience, "Do not then stir yourself up to useless interior activities. Avoid everything that will bring unnecessary complications into your life. Live as much peace and quiet and retirement as you can, and do not go out of your way to get involved in labors and duties, no matter how much glory they may seem to give to God. Do the tasks appointed to you as perfectly as you can, with disinterested love." And we spent a little time on that disinterested love, talking about the fact that it's not passionless love, but it's love that's not concerned with agenda or outcome. Okay, it's love that immerses itself in the task at hand, in the relationship at hand for its own sake, and not for anything beyond that at the moment. It's just right here, right now, focused on that. It's an important concept to try to grasp. So if there's any questions about that, fire away. So do the task appointed to you as perfectly as you can with disinterested love and great peace in order to show your desire of pleasing God. Love and serve Him peacefully, and in all your works preserve recollection of God's presence. Do what you do quietly and without fuss. Seek solitude as much as you can. Dwell in the silence of your own soul and rest there in the simple and simplifying light which God is infusing into you. Do not make the mistake of aspiring to the spectacular experiences that you read about in the lives of the great mystics. None of those graces can sanctify you nearly so well as this obscure and purifying light and love of God, which is given you to no other end than to make you perfect in His love. All right. So he's trying to express something here that's central to this. And this is going to be kind of the rub here. This is going to be what we're trying to balance. So take a look at the 2 pages from his book. And let's read through this and continue this thought. Trying to figure out how it is we're going to actively pursue our spiritual journey without going into negative returns. Starting with the first full paragraph on page 4. Reflect sometimes on the disquieting fact that most of your statements of opinions, tastes, deeds, desires, hopes, and fears are statements about someone who is not really present. When you say, I think, it's often not you who think, but they, quote unquote. It is the anonymous authority of the collectivity speaking through your mask. When you say, I want, you are sometimes simply making an automatic gesture of accepting, paying for what has been forced upon you. That is to say, you reach out for what you have been made to want. Who is this I that you imagine yourself to be? An easy and pragmatic branch of psychological thought will tell you that you can hook up your pronoun with your proper name and declare that you are the bearer of that name. You know who you are. You are aware of yourself as a person. Perhaps there's a beginning of truth in this. It's better to describe yourself with a name that is yours alone than with a noun that applies to a whole species. For then you are evidently aware of yourself as an individual subject and not just an object, or as a nameless unit in a multitude. It is true that for modern man, even to be able to call himself by his own proper name is an achievement that evokes wonder both in himself and in others. But this is only a beginning, and a beginning that primitive man would perhaps been able to laugh at. For when a person appears to know his own name, it is still no guarantee that he is aware of the name as representing a real person. On the contrary, it may be the name of a fictitious character occupied in very active self-impersonation in the world of business, of politics, of scholarship, or of religion. This, however, is not the I who can stand in the presence of God and be aware of him as a thou. For this I, there is perhaps no clear thou at all. Perhaps even other people are merely extensions of the I, reflections of it, modifications of it, aspects of it. Perhaps for this I, there is no clear distinction between itself and other objects. It may find itself immersed in the world of objects and to have lost its own subjectivity, even though it may be very conscious and even aggressively definite in saying I. I know this sounds kind of crazy. He'll bring it a little bit more together in this next page. If such an I one day hears about contemplation, he will perhaps set himself to become a contemplative. That is, he will wish to admire in himself something called contemplation. And in order to see it, he will reflect on his alienated self. He will make contemplative faces at himself like a child in front of a mirror. I love that image. He will cultivate the contemplative look that seems appropriate to him and that he likes to see in himself. And the fact that his busy narcissism is turned within and feeds upon itself in stillness and secret love will make him believe that his experience of himself is an experience of God. But the exterior I, the I of projects, of temporal finalities, the I that manipulates objects in order to take possession of them, is alien from the hidden interior I, who has no projects and seeks to accomplish nothing, even contemplation. He seeks only to be and to move, for he is dynamic, according to the secret laws of being itself, and according to the promptings of a superior freedom, that is of God, rather than to plan and to achieve according to his own desires. It will be ironical indeed if the exterior self seizes upon something within himself and slyly manipulates it as if to take possession of some interior contemplative secret, imagining that this manipulation can somehow lead to the emergence of an inner self. The inner self is precisely that self which cannot be tricked or manipulated by anyone, even by the devil. He is like a very shy wild animal that never appears at all whenever an alien presence is at hand, and comes out only when all is perfectly peaceful, in silence, when he is untroubled and alone. He cannot be lured by anyone or anything, because he responds to no lure except that of the divine freedom. Sad is the case of that exterior self that imagines himself contemplative and seeks to achieve contemplation as the fruit of planned effort and of spiritual ambition. He will assume varied attitudes, meditate on the inner significance of his own postures, and try to fabricate for himself a contemplative identity. And all the while, there is nobody there. There is only an illusory fictional I which seeks itself, struggles to create itself out of nothing, maintained in being by its own compulsion and the prisoner of his private illusion.
Can you repeat that?
Okay. Maybe take that and read it again to yourself and see if it didn't make a lot of sense just now. Hopefully you came away with the idea that the more you contemplate contemplation, the more you're going in the wrong direction. Contemplation is really a letting go, not a grabbing onto and trying to make it something. The Desert Fathers talked about those who went into the desert for any other reason than what Thomas Merton is calling just the sense of being, and they went mad in the wilderness. Literally went crazy, or they couldn't stand it and they had to run back to the cities and the towns. Because when you really get into this stark wilderness, either interiorly or exteriorly, and you're trying to create something, to build something, to be something, then it's going to elude you just like the end of the rainbow or the horizon will elude you. It's a very different kind of feeling. You know, I remember when I was trying to do this, I was trying to grab it by the throat and make it mine, and I couldn't understand why. I never felt any difference. There was never any more peace. There was never more sense of presence or anything. And there was a point, and the only way I can describe it, it was like a pushing off and a letting go, rather than a leaning forward and grabbing. But at the same time, there's effort being expended. There's still discipline to showing up to whatever it is that you purpose to do. But I guess maybe a way to put it is, if your desire to even enter into this journey at all, this spiritual journey, this contemplative way, is for some outcome out there, whether it's named or whether it's unnamed, you know, why are you doing this? I guess that's a good question to ask yourself. If you're doing this for what? Like I laughingly said last week, I wanted to be Thomas Merton. You know, I wanted to be that character. Well, that's absolutely going to be the kiss of death. You know, but if you want this just because you want to be in a relationship, you know, it's just about right here, right now, that there is something deeper that's drawing you, but it's not an ambition. It's not a goal out there someplace. It's just a desire and a willingness to continue to show up to this moment. Whatever this moment is. Right now, this moment is this room, this circle, this class. That's great. You showed up for it. Tomorrow morning, if you wake up early and you sit down for your devotional with your cup of coffee and your book or your Bible, whatever, you just show up for that moment. It's not leading to some revelation that's going to turn on a light to make you understand, or it's not about the status that you're going to achieve when you can say, yeah, I did my centering prayer, you know, for half an hour, for a full week. It's none of that kind of stuff. It's just, if I can hopefully get that across to you, there's such a difference in the way this whole thing is going to feel. It's going to feel so different than everything else that you strive for, plan for, and try to achieve.
Not trying to be funny, which is unusual for me. It seems like the moment you contemplate trying to be a contemplative, you've attached an agenda to it. So, like, how do you enter into this description, this walk, this way of being, when it says anytime you're exerting effort or planning or designing an outcome or have a desire to accomplish something, that you've already missed the boat. So is it time for me to leave the class?
No.
I love you, mean it, got it, gotta go. I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
Can I just ask a question? I mean, there's an intentionality, it seems, in carving the time and allowing the time for silence, but then just leaving the silence, whatever it's going to be. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like you have to have some sense of framework just to know the fact that you're getting up. to me, it's feeling like, okay, if I think that I want to explore what this is about and not expect an outcome, I have been finding that it's best for me to say I need this amount of time to allow myself to get out of my head space and the wild horses that keep going in all these directions. But I have to discipline myself to have that time slot if I want to have that happen and be in a position or a posture to be able to absorb what this is about.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Yeah, when we get to the program section and we actually start to talk about the structure that we're going to be building, our own internal structure for ourselves, that's going to have features for us externally, but still our own structure. We're going to talk about planning the work and working the plan. We're even going to talk about formalizing it to the point that we create a weekly grid, something that we just get up every day and we do. But kind of like where Bill's going with this, yes, that's going to be planning it. We're going to think about that, and we're going to dedicate ourselves to that plan, whatever we set for ourselves. But in the doing of the plan, it's different. It's like if you're sitting and you're watching a beautiful sunset, and you're just mesmerized and you're just inside that living picture. The moment that you say, wow, this is beautiful, I got to go get my camera. Now you've left the building. You are now the whole experience is an object under glass that you are, objectifying and you're looking at. You are no longer in it anymore. I love the image that he gives of a child making contemplative faces in the mirror. It's like, this is what a contemplative looks like. This is what I need to do. I need to show up for my meditation. And you're thinking about it. You're objectifying it the whole time. You are not in the experience. You are looking at the experience. The way that Frank has described motorcycle riding as opposed to riding in a car. In a car, it's like looking at a picture in a frame. On a motorcycle, you're inside the picture, And it's in a whole different experience. Now, I'm not a motorcycle rider. I used to be a bicyclist now, before, in the time where I did cross-country type of bicycling. That's even another step beyond the motorcycle, because now you're really feeling every bit of the terrain, and you're inside it. So I can imagine it from that point of view, even though I'm not a motorcyclist. But it's kind of like that, too. Are you looking at this as a picture in a frame from a comfortable perch over here and trying to imagine yourself in a sort of lifestyle? Or are you just losing yourself? Maybe that's another way to put it. Are you still conscious of yourself, that I, or does that I go away in the moment?
I was trying to think how I would answer it, and for me, if the ego is stroked in any way, in other words, I want this for me, I want to be that person, I'm going to become that, I'm going to grab this for myself. If the ego's involved in any way, then that's the point at which I've lost it. And if it's me trying to get away from the attachment to the ego, then I'm moving in the right direction.
That's good too. Yeah.
Can it just be for the experience without an expectation?
Perfect. Yes. Yeah. Pure experience without expectation. If you bring expectation into your centering prayer time, it's going to blow the whole thing. You're constantly going to be conscious of, oh, I'm not doing it right. Oh, I had to go back to the sacred word so many times. Whatever it is that you're thinking, it's just like stepping away from all that, There are no strokes to the ego. It's just being there. Nobody's going to see what you do. You're not going to get any brownie points for this. You're doing it for a whole different set of reasons.
I'm not trying to distract from what we're trying to focus on, but it seems like liken it to me when I used to videotape my kids' sports events. It took me out of the moment, but there was also a time when I could be back in the moment, when I could, without all the distractions, look at the video and reflect on it and savor it. So is there a place for that? I mean, I know that you can be so trying to capture moments and miss the moment.
Absolutely.
But sometimes capturing the moment in video or a painting or a picture kind of almost makes it a remembrance. It's a special time of me sitting at the picnic table looking out at the lake or whatever. It's a place of peace or...
Once again, it's going to be a balance. It's not either or, it's both and. There's times where, it's absolutely appropriate to take the picture. You want to have that moment for the children, for posterity, for the family. But we also have to realize what we're doing when we do that. We have stepped out. Has anyone seen the movie, the new Walter Mitty?
Yes.
The one with, what's his name?
Stiller.
Stiller, yeah. There's a scene toward the end of the movie where he finally finds the mythical photographer high in the Himalayas who's he's all set up and he's waiting to snap a picture of a snow leopard. And it's a cat that's very elusive and everything. And Walter finds him in the Himalayas. You have to see the movie. And he sits down next to him and he says, "Oh, there he is. And so he lets Walter Mitty look through the telephoto and he sees the snow leopard perfectly framed. And then he comes back to the camera and he just sits there looking through the camera. And finally, Walter's saying, "Oh, are you going to take it? Are you going to take the picture?" And his response is, "Sometimes I don't. If I really like a moment and I just want to stay in it, I don't want the distraction of the camera." It's that perfect expression of even the act of snapping, even though everything that he had done to climb up to that altitude in the Himalayas to take this picture, if he likes the moment, sometimes he doesn't. It's like that.
It makes me think of the juxtaposition of art and life, because when you're creating with the camera or the movie, you just have to understand that your intention is to create and capture, but art can be just as moving an experience watching later. And art is looking at a snow leopard framed in a lens and maybe not capturing, but
And sometimes you can get lost within the viewfinder too. There can be that same experience, even though there's a part of you that's still mechanically working and snapping the picture and doing things, but you can be in a flow within the process that can be just as immersive. Certainly painters and other artists and musicians talk about that flow. And so again, it's not necessarily either or, but we need to be able to tell the difference. I guess that's what we want. Are you still in the flow? Are you still in an agendaless process? Or has now it turned over to your attention is now out there someplace, toward the outcome, toward the agenda? That's going to be the difference. And you need to know the difference, because if you're going to expend the effort and create the structure and be disciplined to it, then you need to know, am I still in it? Or have I stepped out now and I'm a little kid making contemplative faces in the mirror again, trying to be something that I'm not? That's it. This isn't about being something that you're not. This is about becoming who you really are, or allowing yourself to be who you really are by letting everything else go. Maybe this will become clearer when we go through some of these centering the pendulum, and we talk about these what feel like dualisms, but they're really not. But the pendulum has swung so far one side, we're going to be trying to pull it back the other side, and hopefully not end up the extreme on the other side, but in a centered position. But I just wanted to have a little bit of a discussion about that. See if you can at least think through the concept enough. And it's something that we can talk about, especially as we get into the process of it, that there is this fundamental difference. And we as modern Westerners are really going to be starting over here with the pendulum pulled to the side of hyperactivity and hyper-planning and intellectualism, and always trying to think through to the goal, the milestone, the outcome. And that's something that we want to let go of as we bring the pendulum back. Moving kind of on in the outline, this is something that our church, the Western church, is not teaching us. And this is part of the problem. What we talked about in the book study when we were talking about the 4 ways and the 5th way, and that the modern Western church has become so engulfed in furthering, in the institution of church, that it's lost its ability to even communicate these kinds of nuances or this kind of mystical approach, contemplative approach to spirituality. So not only is it not teaching it, it's become so alien to the church experience today that these things are looked at as occult, as demonic. You know, just if you have some time to burn, you know, type in Richard Rohr, type in Brennan Manning, versus evangelical Christianity or something in the search engine, and see what comes up. You're going to find these just vitriolic screeds against Richard Rohr and Thomas Merton and Brennan Manning and all of these, because the pendulum is swung so far to this intellectual side that even something that looks or sounds like contemplation or mysticism is going to be looked at as absolutely demonic and something that has to be put down in order for the faith to remain pure.
Just
So,
that word mystic,
yeah.
that's a lightning rod for so many.
Yeah, I could be run out on a rail just for saying the word. But it's not only mystic or mysticism, it's contemplation too. That just raises the hackles on so many Christians. So you just, even though you're all here and I'm kind of preaching to the choir to a certain degree, understand that we've been steeping in this tea, this brew for such a long time that a lot of these things are still going to be present in us, maybe subconsciously, and in a way that we're not aware of. And so even though, yes, you're here for the purpose of finding a way to develop a contemplative approach to life, just understand there's going to be a lot of these biases that you might not even be aware of, and they're going to show up in other ways. And those are things to be, again, aware of so that we can let those go as well. But the church, the Western church, isn't teaching these things. It has come to an intellectually based, a theology-based view of spirituality. If we can think right thoughts about God, if we can have no error in our theology, then we will be acceptable. I mean, put that bald-faced, it sounds, well, no, that's not the way it is. But to a certain degree it is. You know, it's about doing the right things, about thinking the right things, rather than being present in another way. Now, the Eastern Church is different. And the Greek Orthodox Church and Eastern churches, Orthodox churches, are gaining a certain share of young people, millennials now, because they have a different approach. And they have something called theosis. And I don't know if you've ever heard that word, but I suppose it could be literally translated as divination, you know, becoming. It's not becoming God, but it's becoming one with God. I suppose the analog for us would be sanctification. You know, sanctification in the Western Church is seen as a process of becoming more and more, you know, like God in thought and deed. But the Eastern Church takes it a little further, that we can become one with God. And they see that as the basic approach, and the whole purpose of the church is to foster that process of theosis in its people, rather than just thinking thoughts about God. Yeah.
No, as I think about, and listening to all you're saying, I'm reminded of the Catholic Church, you know, being brought up Catholic. Mystery was accepted. We all understood that mystery was an accepted part of God, and mystics were part of the whole thing. But it also reminds me that they would have the Blessed Sacrament. I mean, if anyone was raised Catholic, then they'd know what that was. It was this gold thing on a stand that had a circle here, and the Blessed Sacrament was supposed to represent the closest thing next to the Eucharist, the actual presence. And the Blessed Sacrament was kept in a veiled velvet cloth, and what would happen, it would have a showing, and it would be brought into your church, and people would just keep vigils and just sit with that presence of that sacrament, which is a lot of what we're trying to instill here. And I think that there would be a lot more acceptance of these thoughts and ideas in a Catholic setting, though not altogether. But I think that Western evangelical Christianity is almost an example of how extreme things have gotten. And I ended up in that setting as well. But the Catholics, yet they still also, not all of them fully accept Richard Rohr. It's out of that matrix that he came. But there's more of an acceptance of a lot of these principles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the line that I got from a priest once, that I know I've told some of you here before, is that at the Protestant Reformation 500 years ago, the Catholics took the bread and the Protestants took the book, and they've never been together since. You know, so the bread represents the sacraments, the bread represents the mystical traditions of the church, and the book, of course, represents the scriptures. And there's a certain truth to that. You know, the Protestants, in trying to divorce themselves and separate themselves from everything Roman, went so far as to just throw out all church tradition, throw out everything except this book. They said Scripture alone is what gives us God's revelation. Not any of this experiential stuff. Scripture, if we can understand this right, we got it all. And so it became hyper-intellectual. At the same time that the Reformation is going on, of course, the Enlightenment is going on, and everything is becoming the scientific rationalist principles that are driving Western civilization. That got married with the Reformation and their idea of Scripture alone, and so now we're off to the races. And that is our heredity. You know, that's our branch here in the United States, is coming from that Western European ideas 500 years ago. And so the Catholic Church, continuing on with us, of course, but it has continued that more sacramental, mystical approach, traditional approach. And so, yes, the Catholic Church has more of this in place. You know, obviously, most of the people we're reading here are Catholics. And when I was even in the evangelical church moving in this direction, even though I was in an evangelical setting, everyone I was reading and everyone I was talking to were Catholics, because they were the ones who were embracing this, not the Protestants. You know, again, it's not either or. We want to bring this together. This doesn't mean that we leave our minds at the door and we never use them. Of course not. We need to. The Eastern Orthodox Church has a great way of looking at theology. Not that you can absolutely be correct in describing the ineffable God. That's the way the West looks at theology. We can actually do that. What the East does is say theology is meant to limit error. It's there to put guardrails across the highway. So these are the limits. Within this limits you can play, all right? But here, beyond this, we've gone too far. Beyond this, it goes into excess. Beyond this, it goes into abuse. And so it's a whole different way of looking even at the Scriptures. Stuff to consider as we talk about this. But just know that our Western Church isn't really as helpful as it could be in fostering and drawing people along this, what the Eastern Church would see as a transformative process leading to a oneness or a likeness with God, a sense of pure connection with God. And so that's really where it's going. This whole division of clergy and laity is another problem. Even though the Reformation, one of the rallying cries of the Reformation was the priesthood of believers. You know, what does that mean? It means he didn't have to go through Roman clergy in order to be able to connect with God. That literally everyone is a priest in that sense and has the ability to go directly to God. Beautiful sentiment, but we still have clergy and we still have laity. You know, even the idea of clergy and laity, the words go back to the Greek kleros and laos, and it literally, a kleros was a clerk of someone who administered certain duties. It's the word we get clerk from, you know, and the laos was the common person. But it came to mean the uneducated person, the ignorant person, as opposed to the clerics were the ones who were educated and skilled. And so all of the institutions of church rested on the clergy, and the laity was basically just this passive flock of sheep that were then doled out the Scripture. The Scriptures were kept in Latin, you know, until the 1500s, when finally some of the Scriptures started getting translated into English on pain of death. You know, Wycliffe was exhumed. He was imprisoned for translating the Bible into English, and he was sentenced to death, but he died before they could kill him. So they dug up his bones and burned those and threw them into the river. So this is the kind of attitude that you had, you know, in terms of even holding on to the Scriptures and keeping them in a language that only the church could read, and then doling them out through the liturgy, but people didn't have the Bible in their hands. So there was this, you know, this real us and them kind of situation that had been developing for 1,000 years in the West. And so here we are, the laity, and we don't have any access to this. We don't have the sense that we're supposed to actually take charge of our own spiritual journeys. And this is another thing we're trying to turn around. We absolutely have to. This can't be given to us by osmosis. It can't be bestowed to us. This journey is ours. We have to absolutely enter it ourselves, be active first-person participants, or nothing at all, really. We can't have this just imprinted on us. So it's a change in the whole idea of how we're going to approach this. But even as we take the bull by the horns, as we go ahead and we are actively working on structuring our own journey, at the same time there's this sense of letting it go, letting the outcomes go. So it's a real push-pull kind of thing, and you're going to feel like you're trying to walk the edge of a fence sometimes. It's a real balancing act, but that's okay. There's something that I like to call, I'm not even going to remember what it was, sacred tension is what I like to call it. We would like to think that this spiritual journey is going to give us just perfect peace, but think of the tightrope walker who is walking across the cable. They are constantly balancing. That pole that they carry is in a certain amount of tension. They're always testing, and their muscles are always adjusting. After they've done it for so long, they can walk across as effortlessly as we could walk across the room. But you walking across the room, are you in perfect peace? No, your muscles are in tension. They're doing and the balancing act and everything you need to do, but you're not even aware of it anymore because it has become muscle memory. It's second nature to you. Your spiritual journey will be like that. It'll get easier as you go, but you are constantly in balance and balancing. And so just know that as you start, you're really going to have to balance, and you're going to feel that you're being pulled in different ways, but it'll get easier as you go. I hope I haven't thoroughly confused you now, but I just wanted to get some of these concepts out. They may not make any sense or feel even relevant to you right now. I guarantee you, if you start walking down this path, these things are going to ring in your ears, and then oh, that's what he was talking about. Oh, that's what this person I read was talking about. These things are going to come back to you, and they're going to find their little place like pieces in a jigsaw puzzle as you go further. So for right now, just put it on the shelf, mark it, index it, and leave it alone for now. If it doesn't have a place yet in your puzzle, because it'll have a place to seat. Any questions or issue? Yeah, go ahead.
Sound out of context, but it keeps sticking in my brain, and I want an answer to it. What's the difference between contemplation and meditating? If you're going to go contemplate something or meditate on something, what's the simple distinction between the two?
For us, the terms are interchangeable.
Okay.
We don't mean anything different by meditation or contemplation. But both terms can also be used to actually think deeply about something. I'm going to meditate on something. I'm going to contemplate on something. That means we're going to take something and we're really going to think deeply about it. And so that's even why it's even more confusing, because we have this dual use. We're taking these words and using them in a special sense. When we say meditate, we're talking about the type of meditation that is stepping aside from conscious thought. And the same thing with contemplation. So we're using them in that sense. But for us, the terms are interchangeable. But we just need to know what we're talking about. William, did you have something?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of listening to a book on tape called The Untethered Soul. And the author talks about this idea of, he remembers finding himself one time, he was having a conversation when he was younger, and there was a pause in the discussion, and he just had the thought that my thoughts are not me, and he started to really play around with that concept, and ultimately where it led him to was this realization that we might have thoughts of things that happened in our past, but those thoughts are no different from the thought that that's a table or that's a chair. And those thoughts don't define us, but there's something behind the thought, some part of the soul that's just observing the thought. And it's when we get attached to the thought in terms of it being good or bad or things of that nature, they become problems for us, essentially. And the process he described, I think, fits nicely or resembles the whole effortless effort, way kind of place where you get to this place where he kind of described non-attachment from like a Buddhist perspective as just not getting attached to whatever that thought might be.
That's good.
And just being present, observing it, responding to it in the way you would respond in a normal interaction, but knowing that the soul is not defined by those thoughts. And by practicing that, and I haven't started practicing it as yet, but by practicing that, allegedly it takes the energy out of some of these thoughts, and they can just kind of flow through you and go on their merry way.
What he said. Is that helpful? Then let's take that just one step further. Think about it this way. Every thought you have is always a thought about the past. Because as soon as you think about it, it's past. Even if you're thinking about the present, as soon as you think about it, it's the past. The only way we can experience the present moment, is without words. We're just immersed in it, unfolding. But as soon as we think about it, we've taken a snapshot, like taking a picture of the moment, and we're thinking about this, and the present is moving on, and we're now left in the past. Every time we think about it, yeah.
Another way that I've heard sort of dealing with thoughts is that because they are in the past, that they're more of like a stress release. And so that's when one would come back to the sacred word easily, gently, not trying to force out the thought, but easily, gently coming back to the sacred word. It's just thoughts, bubbling up from, from daily life, and by sitting in a contemplative situation or meditation, we can grasp onto that thought, but that's not what we want to do. We just want to, let go. Oh, I'll come back to my sacred word, or easily, and then they just go.
It's just like Sean Penn taking or not taking the picture of the snow leopard. If he takes the picture, he's frozen that moment into the past. If he doesn't take the picture, he's maintaining his immersion in the presence. And of course, the whole analogy is blown because he's sitting there talking about it. But how are you going to do that in a movie any other way to communicate this? But I think you get the point, right? Hopefully. So yeah, this is the kind of the rub, of us. And for us as modern Westerners, it's much more difficult because we're acculturated in such a different way. So we're going to have to start pulling the pendulum back, which is leading right into the next section here. Number 5, centering the pendulum. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No, we just did number 4. Didn't we?
Yes.
So 8 different pairs here. And the one on the left-hand one, the first one, except for those of you who brought your notes from last week, I had there, then, and here, now reversed. So I reversed them. So if you got your new notes for me today, it's in the right order. So the one on the left-hand side is the way that we are normally acculturated in modern Western culture to deal with life. We're intellectual. We're legally based. We're always trying to acquire something, to add it to us. We're more focused on events rather than processes. We're focused on exterior, material, consumerism, building out there someplace. When we think of spirituality, we're thinking of the supernatural. And we're focused on the there-then. We're focused on heaven, usually, or on some outcome. And the result of all this is a fear-based experience. So what we're going to be talking about is not eliminating those, because they're still part of it. But we want to take the pendulum that is way out here now and start to bring it back to center by balancing it, by at least understanding what it is that we're up against. If we are so intellectually based, if we're going to grind everything through the intellect, if we're going to be thinking about God and not experiencing God, then we have to realize, okay, this is going to be part of our personal transformation process, is to start balancing that with this experiential approach. The intellectual approach, I'm saying it's passive here. It may not feel passive because you might have studied your butt off in order to get to where you are, theologically. But it's passive in the sense that it's not actually putting and applying and walking through what it is that you have collected as knowledge on your bookcase. Does that make sense? We need to actually get out and apply this, run it through. So it's not a passive approach. It's not just learning something about God and then waiting for the revelation to hit and for the transformation to be realized. It's actually going out step by step and working through the process. And it's a very different approach. So we have to realize, I know we've talked a lot about the intellectual, so maybe we don't need to beat that horse too much. But just think about how much that we put stock into just knowing facts about things, and to imagine that we can know the right thoughts about God, rather than experiencing Him in the only place we can, which is in that present moment without snapping the picture. That present moment without snapping the picture with a word, with a thought, just being. That's how we're going to know who God is, in a way that is absolutely ours. It wasn't given to us as a theological fact. We know that we know that we know who God is because we spent time in that place, which is the only place we can actually experience that kind of, what do you want to say? Call it goodness, call it love, acceptance, salvation, deliverance. I mean, attach whatever word you want to it. It's now in the past. But when you're there, you won't have a word for it, but you'll know what it is. And it's going to change things. It's going to change how you think about stuff. The legal versus the relational. This idea that somehow we can behave our way into God's good graces. That somehow from the outside in we can conform into this acceptable person, this person who's going to be saved. And of course we're thinking of salvation in the there then, in the afterlife. But it's not about conformance, it's about transformance. It's not about outside in, it's about inside out. And it's not just about obeying, but actually graduating to what James calls the law of liberty. This idea that even as you continue to act in a quote-unquote legal way, it doesn't feel restrictive at all. It's a completely different experience because you're no longer just following rules, you're actually just doing what you do because you've been transformed from the inside out. So pulling that pendulum from legal over to relational. From addition to subtraction. That's the famous quote from Meister Eckhart, who says, the spiritual way is much more about subtraction than it is about addition. It's not about going out and acquiring something that you don't have that you need to make yourself whole. It's about stripping away and letting go everything that obscures you from the truth, which is everything you need is already here. When we're just in that moment, when we don't take the picture, that moment is perfect. It's enough. We don't need anything else, and anything else added to it would make it imperfect. There's that quote that perfection is not when there's nothing left to add. Perfection is when there's nothing left to take away. That's perfection. So it's a different way of thinking. It's stopping looking at our lives as a fundamental lack or emptiness that we need to fill, but an abundance that's already there that we need to uncover, right? Jesus said, I came to bring you life and that abundantly. Everything the Father has is already yours, from the prodigal son. That's what the Father says to the elder brother. Everything I have is yours. What part of everything don't you understand? And if you try to diminish your brother's share, how is that going to give you more than everything that you already have anyway? It's a fool's errand. We already have everything, but we still run around. There's a quote from Rumi. Can I say it right? He says, it's like a person running from room to room trying to find the pearl necklace that is already around their neck. Or the one that I've used is like you're sitting at a table that is just laid out for the most incredible feast, and you're praying to God for some sustenance and provision, and he's just banging his head and saying, take and eat. What more can I do? I set the table. It's all there in front of you. But we're still praying. God, please feed me. This is the problem that we have. We have been conditioned to look at our lives as empty. We're children of original sin. There's this gulf between us and God that somehow we have to appease, and we have to do something to erase that gulf. Well, we can't do anything. It's now praying for the blood of Jesus. But what Jesus is trying to tell us, and coming from a Jewish point of view, Jews don't believe in original sin. They believe in original goodness. God looked and saw his creation, and it was good. So it's a whole different approach. Can we turn that particular corner as well? From acquisition, from trying to acquire something, to kenosis, which is the word that Paul used, of an emptying, just a shedding of all that stuff. Event versus process. We are so conditioned to look at everything along the spiritual journey as an event. Our conversion is an event. Our salvation is an event. It's a moment before and after. The cross of Jesus is an event. Before then there wasn't salvation. After then there was. And yet, Paul is also telling us that we work out our salvation in fear and trembling. He's alluding to a process. Okay? Is it one or the other? No, really, it's both. We're going to experience events along the way. Moments that things change. Moments of dedication when we consciously get on the path, get on the road. But they're part of a process as well. Is it a light? Is light a particle or is it a wave? It's both. It depends on the way you look at it. Is our journey a particle or a wave? It's both. It depends on how you look at it. But let's understand that it is both. It's not just this. When I get to this point, I'm done. And everything is going to be blissful. No, we're still going to be oscillating. It's still a process after that. But that can be a significant moment, sure.
And when you're talking about subtraction, life is about subtraction. It still feels like it's a combination of subtraction and addition, because the addition is the tasting, the experiencing of not what's in here, but just applying. And yet, when I hear subtracting, sometimes, just what you mentioned about Paul, I press on, I buffet my body, and those things sound like addition. The clarity for me is that I can't do anything to add or subtract from my salvation and my completeness with God, but I wrestle with my pendulum swinging all the way to, I got to subtract everything. Because it's like there's nothingness there.
And that's
shedding the things that are entangling me, but wanting to embrace the things that God has put in front of me to enrich my kingdom on earth, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, see if this helps. I remember an aerobic instructor saying, you don't really have to worry about inhaling. Just exhale. The inhaling will take care of itself. Expend your breath fully. Because that's what we typically don't do. We take these little half breaths, so we're not expelling all of the air, because once you do that, your body will automatically reinflate those lungs, and it'll pull in the full breath that we really need to fully oxygenate the muscles and do the things we need to do. So all you have to concentrate on is the exhale. The inhale will take care of itself. It's kind of like that. Yes, you will experience more and more things that you hadn't experienced previously that'll feel like you're adding to, but what you've really done is just uncovered more of what's already there. In other words, the truth is not out there like Mulder was famously trying. The truth isn't out there. The kingdom isn't out there. There's nothing out there to go find. It's here, it's within, it's among, it's in the midst of, it's already here. Now, you're going to have to take the journey to find out you didn't have to take the journey, just like Dorothy did with the ruby slippers. She had to take the journey to find out that she already had the power. But why is that story so powerful to us generation after generation? Because it's telling us something about the human condition and the spiritual journey. We already have the ruby slippers on. We might have to take the journey to find out how they work, but they're already here. Okay.
So why do I have to show up?
Why do you have to show up?
Yeah, why do I have to show up?
because it's not an event, it's a process, or it's both. It's your dedication to showing up that continues to strip away the stuff. The other word picture that I've used is Michelangelo. You know, that he purportedly could look at a raw block of stone, and whatever he was commissioned to sculpt out of that, he'd walk around it until he could imagine the finished sculpture standing inside the heart of the stone as if it were frozen in a block of ice. And when he had it fully imagined and he could fully see it in his mind to the last vein and muscle, right, then he said the only thing that's left to do is remove everything that's not the horse, that's not the statue. Just remove all the rest of the stuff. You know, it's like that. You know, the kingdom person that you hope to be at the conclusion of this journey, or as a result of this journey, is already standing inside of you. Your task is not to go out and find that person and bring back. Your task is simply to remove everything that's not. But here's where the analogy breaks down a bit. It's not us focusing on the negative space that does it. It's us just living our lives in concert with this way to keep showing up to the moments of our lives and the things that we do. And that will, by abrasion as we move through life, continue to strip away the things that are not the horse. Right? I don't know if that helps, but I hope so.
Still wrestling with it.
And you know, these, I hope you are. You know, it's not going to just be a word that's going to do it. But as you start to move down the path, I think these things will get clearer for you as you go. But at least recognize that there's something there to grind on. Maybe that's good enough for now.
Yeah, it's grinding.
Okay. Perfect.
Or like the maturity that Brother Lawrence got to, if he wasn't even needing to show up only when it was demanded, but he was able to keep showing up so completely and abandoning himself so completely to every single moment. It elongated, instead of having one moment of really showing up, it was his entire life. It was just consumed with presence.
Well, I'm sure Michelangelo had many stones and rocks that cracked apart.
Okay.
He started over.
I mean, yeah, he envisioned them, but it's like, you know, I don't see what's inside of this rock. I have my vision of it, but I can't believe he didn't crack open a bunch of them that were like, oh, I didn't see that vein in the middle, and half his head fell off.
Okay. I'm sure.
He couldn't have contemplated all of it.
Well, by their very nature, analogies are not perfect.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. The concept, though, is not invalidated by the fact that not all stones are created equal. So, but this is the way it's going to feel. And when you read, you know, mystic after mystic, contemplative after contemplative in their writings, or you talk to them, they're going to be telling you the same thing in different words. But there's a common experience here, that it's not about acquiring something and bringing it in that makes you whole. It's about letting go of the things that are limiting you and keeping you from realizing. And so it's going to feel different in the way that you proceed, you know. And so try to at least get that in the forefront and keep grinding on it. Just keep grinding on it. It'll make more sense in the experience, not just in the intellectual understanding. You know, because some of these things are always going to be a bit of a paradox. All right? There's just no way around it.
That's the fun of the mystery. And the
Exactly.
sense.
Embrace the paradox. Don't think that you can rationalize it down to one thing, because it should always be vibrating. It should always be in motion. Otherwise, it's not really alive, right?
I guess on the same vein as Bill, I guess part of me thinks of, I mean, not doing anything, I guess it's the wrong verbiage, but like I come here to acquire or to add on new tools and practices. So I think of that as adding on. I come here to church and to this group to learn to practice new things. So in that way, I am going out and actively looking to acquire knowledge that I sit under to learn to practice. I mean, I guess then I go home and get to practice taking stuff out. But, I coming here, I think I am actively coming out to acquire something that I don't have.
And that's true in terms of acquiring intellectual knowledge. Remember, we're not talking about one or the other. We're talking about a both and. So bringing the extremes into a middle. So yes, here all we can do is sit here and trade ideas. And so some of you're going to accept, some you're going to reject. The ones you accept, you can consider as acquiring a new concept. That and what's it, $1.25 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks now. That acquisition of the knowledge won't do you anything. Did I get the amount wrong?
You said $1.25 at Starbucks, $7.25.
Oh, okay. Well, it depends. It depends on how many latte things you put after the end of the coffee part. But the point is that acquisition of a concept is now only another open door for you now to move through. And it's in the moving through that you actually can experience another shedding of something that is limiting or obscuring what it is that is actually the truth in your life. And so, yes, we may acquire some knowledge, a new concept we haven't heard before, or even right now grinding on some of these concepts. But it's not the acquisition of knowledge that is the point. It is the ability now to take a step in a new direction, and taking the step that is the point. And in doing that, that natural abrasion along the way will be taking another layer off of everything that's not the horse. That's the way this works.
So if hopefully by the time we die, we're going to be the best that we can be.
Hopefully before then.
Oh, yeah.
It would be nice.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah.
No, but you're going to be the best you will be.
What was that?
I like that.
What did you say?
You'll be the best you're going to be, or you will be by the time you die.
Well, I'm just trying to get, I've never been presented with this kind of information before.
Join the group.
Yeah, I know, it's like, but so, we want to shed the things that aren't of God, maybe? Or is everything of God? I thought God was everything.
Once again, it's not, this is where the analogy does break down. Like I said, if you're a sculptor, yes, you're going to be chipping away the negative space, okay? We don't want to focus on the negative space. We don't want to focus on the things that are not of God or any way that we just want to show up and continue to let go, be immersed in the moment. The work will be done naturally, organically. We don't have to think about the process. In fact, the more we think about the process, the more we're going into negative returns. And I know we need to stop, but just chew on this for a while, let it kind of percolate. Maybe don't think about it too hard; you'll sprain your brain. But we'll hit it again next week, and we'll continue to come back to this because it's an important concept. But it will feel like at least this. Okay, at least this. Have the willingness to sell everything you have and give it to the poor and follow Jesus. What is the meaning of that story about the rich young ruler who comes to Jesus and says, "What must I do to obtain eternal life?" Well, how do you read the law? I've already done this since I was a kid. Jesus acknowledges and says, yes, you have, but there's something you lack. Sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and come follow me. Be willing to let go of those things that you are clinging to. Be willing to let go of the edges that you have put theologically, intellectually around God, the image you've created of Him. Be willing to kill your sacred cows, because in the doing of that, the letting go of that, the openness, the vulnerability, the disquiet and the discomfort that causes in you is the process of what it feels like to come close to God.
So it's a means of, getting close to God.
That's it.
Letting go of the other stuff that's in your way.
Letting go, absolutely. Okay, we're really way over time. Steve, did you have anything quick or is it going to be a longie?
I don't want to keep you guys. It's just something that I've been thinking about since you said it. It's about how the Western Church versus the Eastern Church are just like the differential in ideas, and about how I experience that myself. and how, I was told, or I was, like, when I became a Christian at the age of 19, it's like everything, all of the answers are in the Bible. And how I was, I understood that God created everything, but then it's like there was no experiential part of it. It's like you study the Word, you get to know God by the Word, by His infallible, inerrant Word, and you know that, and you know God. And when I got clean and sober in 2016, then it's like my whole mind expanded and like understood God in that experiential way, where it's like, oh my gosh, I can go outside and I can just be in the moment and I can experience God. Like right now on the corner of the street, like I can just look at a tree and I can experience God. It's like everything's brighter, and the world's so much bigger, and the author is so much bigger than his book. Like, I don't know. That really struck me because it's so true. I experienced that, and I think that really is one of the reasons that I don't really. It's hard for me to still embrace in church, because that's like all I was taught. Read the Bible, know the Bible, like defend the Bible, but it's like, why don't you look at what is right in front of you? Like God's fingerprint is
Amen.
all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, but I was like stuck like this for so long, and it's like I just think about sorry, this was a longie. But like I think about what Jesus said to I don't know who he was speaking to specifically, but he just said, you guys search the scriptures because you think that in them are the knowledge of life. Like, you're searching the scriptures, but Moses wrote about me, like, look at what's standing right in front of you. They testify about me, like, right here. But you guys are all, oh, the life. That's what I picture when I read that.
So, for those of us who have been taught that all the answers in the Bible are in the Bible, see if you can turn this little nuanced page. The rational answers we seek and crave are not in the Bible, but the experience of getting the answers is what the Bible is all about. What does it look like to pursue that truth, to go through what needs to be gone through in order to be one with God? That's what's in the Bible, not the rational answers to the rational questions that we so cling to and want. It's a little different, but it's a huge one. And we got to end. I'm so sorry, dear, but we're already a quarter after. Unless you have a real short comment.
It just says in Corinthians, I think, correct me, someone, if I'm wrong, it says, and add to these things love. So I think in all the shedding, we still are adding, and it's adding love.
Okay.
The process. The process.
Thanks, everyone. Eat fast.